Hello and welcome to NewsMo. I'm Gaurav Sawant. With me, India Today's consultant editor Shiv Aroor. And Shiv has a cracker of a story. Shiv has been speaking to top sources in Vayu Bhavan at air headquarters. And he's got details of India's airstrikes into Pakistan. Not into Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, but in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And Shiv, there is video evidence you've accessed.
The evidence has been submitted as part of a classified dossier, Gaurav, by the Indian Air Force. 6 days after the airstrikes actually took place. All this while, the Indian Air Force has been using its imagery experts to analyze images taken by both Indian satellites. These are very high resolution images, much clearer images than the commercial satellite pictures that have been put out. Also, right during the strikes and shortly thereafter, there was an aircraft, an intelligence and surveillance aircraft that was flying in Indian airspace and used its synthetic aperture radars to paint some pretty detailed pictures, not as detailed as the satellite pictures, but reasonably detailed pictures of the post-strike damage. Now, all of these images have been put together along with certain other classified details that we've been able to access, but we haven't reported for obvious reasons. And these have been submitted now to the government. Remember, all of this comes at a time when the Indian government sees a lot of misinformation coming in from the other side. There are some international media reports as well, which have used commercial satellite imagery to suggest that the airstrikes were in some way unsuccessful. I just want to point out to our viewers that here on India Today, we report the facts. We report the facts, we ask the questions. The Indian Air Force, very interestingly, Gaurav, has looked at those commercial satellite pictures that have come out, including the one that came out in a widely shared Reuters report today, and said that those images actually are completely commensurate with the airstrike operation that was conducted, though the interpretation by Reuters, the Air Force feels is wrong. So our sources in the Air Force feel is wrong because the very important point is that penetration warheads were used in these strikes, which means the entire intention of the Air Force was not to blow apart those buildings and cause that kind of structural damage to the structures. This is what the Air Force says, but to penetrate deep into those establishments and, you know, as terrible as it sounds, to kill the people inside it. That was the purpose of a penetration strike. Weapons of this kind have been used by the United States many times before as well. The Spice 2000 weapon was specifically armed with a penetration warhead, which would have dramatically lessened its explosive potential, because you don't need a large amount of explosive to actually get into the building. You need a penetration warhead to get into the building, and then a certain amount of explosive to cause human casualties inside.
You know, for the benefit of our viewers, what is a penetration bomb? In the Afghan war, it used to be called a daisy cutter. What does that mean? आतंकवादी जो है ना वो बिल्डिंग के अंदर जाके छुप जाते थे या गुफाओं में जाके छुप जाते थे. They would go and hide in those caves, and the bombs would burst on top and no impact inside. So the Americans actually made bombs which would first penetrate, go deep inside, and then explode, killing the chaps who were inside. That same Israeli Spice 2000 was used by Indian Air Force.
Precisely. So the Spice 2000 armed, and remember people wonder about what Spice is. Spice is a guidance kit for different types of bombs. The ones that were used here were specifically procured for high value targets of this kind, and these are 1,000-kilogram bombs armed with the Spice guidance kit, where the net explosive quantity, Gaurav, would be far less than in a normal precision guided munition, because the purpose of this bomb, like you rightly pointed out, is to employ all of its kinetic energy in the actual penetration of the roof, and then, as intelligence reports had dictated to the Air Force, that there would be reinforced concrete structures below it, possibly a couple of stories below that, going into the actual hill for whatever purposes, for, the indoctrination, the madrasa, for sleeping, because this was a residential facility. So all of those things were taken into account, and a considered decision was taken by the Air Force leadership to employ its Mirage 2000s with these Spice 2000. And I want to say that the Spice 2000 is something that was tested in Pokhran in 2014. I've had a chance today to look at images of a particular test in January 2014, where the test was conducted on very similar lines. 3 meters of reinforced concrete, where these bombs would drill a hole right through 70 centimeters diameter, and the explosion would take place once it had gone right through that concrete. So the superficial scars on the concrete surface would just be a small hole. Once the dust settled, it would just be a small hole, not this kind of massive destruction that people are perhaps expecting. I don't blame people because maybe they don't fully understand how a penetration bomb works. But like I said, like the Air Force is saying, the scars that are even visible in the commercial satellite imagery are commensurate with the use of penetration devices.
Very interesting. So we have our viewers who are joining us, और आपके मन में कोई भी प्रश्न हो शिव से जरूर पूछिए, हम लोग उनका उत्तर देने का प्रयास करेंगे और हम इसे बाइलिंगुअल रखेंगे और लोग हमारे साथ जुड़ेंगे इस पर। अंकित, प्रश्न आ रहे हैं।
सवाल ये भी है कि वो पूछ रहे हैं कि सरकार को, जैसे एयरफोर्स शिव बता रहे हैं कि सरकार को उन्होंने सबूत दिए हैं, what are these evidence that the air force has given to the government?
Okay,
Shiv.
So the evidence, like I said, was in mostly in the form of imagery, but also the Air Force's assessment. So just to break it down once again, there are 12 Indian satellite high-resolution images where I'm told, I haven't seen them myself because they're classified, but where there are very neat high-resolution zooms of the actual entry wounds on those structures. There are pictures, synthetic aperture radar images of an unspecified number taken from that jet, Gaurav. And also, there are many pages in that dossier, I'm told, of the Indian Air Force's own assessment of what those pictures mean. Because ultimately, governments and politicians and others may not fully understand what those pictures mean. So there's a lot of textual analysis of what those pictures mean. And also the Air Force's conclusion that 80% of the strikes have been successful.
And it will not just be restricted to the Air Force analysis. There'll be ground intelligence, there'll be satellite intelligence, there'll be other forms of intelligence, and in the end, all of this will be collated together to form a picture, and that picture may not be very pleasing to Pakistan.
It may not be pleasing to Pakistan, and even though I want to make it very clear, the Air Force doesn't get into politics. So when we broke the story earlier today on India Today, there were some people asking us if the Air Force was under some kind of pressure to come out with proof. I just wanted to say that since these airstrikes, Gaurav, were a political decision, it was a political decision. The Air Force can't go and strike in another country without political consent to do so. Therefore, it was only routine that after this operation got over, the Air Force would have had to present a battle damage assessment in the form of this particular report, and that's what we're actually reporting.
Shiv and Gaurav, though you've explained it before, but it seems that there are few viewers. There is a person called Mohammed Asim who is saying that if it exploded after penetration, then why is the building not damaged?
Okay, so this is the third time I'm saying this, but very, very big difference between a high explosive warhead and a penetration warhead. I'll just break it down very simply. A high explosive warhead would detonate either right at the point of impact on the roof of that building, or just shortly thereafter it would explode. So you would see a huge outward and upward explosion, as a result of which there would be structural damage and the building would be completely demolished and razed to the ground. A penetration warhead basically dives straight at a reinforced device. Just for instance, imagine a kind of aircraft hangar where the bomb would penetrate right through it, and all through that penetration process it would not detonate. There would be no explosion. It would only explode once it has completely pierced through that reinforcement, and it has a certain programmable circuitry on it that can be programmed for a certain depth after which a detonation needs to happen, and that would have happened in this case as well. So the actual explosion would have happened inside that building and not on the surface.
And the aim, incidentally, is not to get that building down. The aim is to kill those who are inside that building. So then you don't need the kind of explosive or shrapnel that will bring the walls down. You only need enough shrapnel or explosives to kill the chaps inside, which is exactly what appears to have happened.
Is there any way to know exactly how many people have been killed?
इंटेलिजेंस, ये केवल इंटेलिजेंस से ही पता चल सकता है कि कितने लोग मरे हैं। शुरू की इंटेलिजेंस क्या थी? एनटीआरओ के में सूत्रों के मुताबिक, और ऐसा मीडिया रिपोर्ट्स भी आई हैं कि वहां पर 300 मोबाइल फोन उस समय एक्टिव थे। ये 300 मोबाइल फोन किसके थे ये हम लोगों को नहीं पता, लेकिन क्या कोई और तरीका है?
Gaurav, like we are dealing with a country. I want to tell all of our viewers that we are dealing with a country that, and this is not an emotional answer, with a country, and correct me if I'm wrong, Gaurav, since you were in Kargil, that managed to hide the number of people from their country who died at the hands of the Indian Army in Kargil and the Air Force for 8 to 9 years, almost a decade. That information was not there. So this is a country that is very proficient in hiding the deaths of its own citizens. That's point number one. Point number two, I can tell you categorically that the Indian Air Force does not have any of its own. The Indian Air Force used jets. They had surveillance aircraft to conduct a battle damage assessment of the strikes. The air chief recently said that they do not count human bodies. He's right. That, again, wasn't an emotional response. The Air Force doesn't have the capability to count human targets. They've only hit the strikes, and whatever else needs to happen, as Gaurav said, has to take place from ground intelligence, of which there is precious little right now or nothing at all, simply because the Pakistan government and the Pakistan army have very effectively cordoned off that whole area. They've quarantined that whole area, and that's also one of the reasons why you haven't seen a single picture of the madrasa or any of those establishments.
You know, when I was covering the Kargil war, there were more than 200 Pakistani bodies. Can you imagine? Pakistani soldiers of the Northern Light Infantry, their bodies were buried by the Indian Army. The 13th Battalion of Jammu and Kashmir Rifles, Colonel Y.K. Joshi, it was under his supervision that India had to actually send a Maulvi to those heights so that those Pakistani dead bodies of their soldiers could be buried. एक सच्चाई जो पाकिस्तान अपने देश को कभी नहीं बताता है कि पाकिस्तानी जो सिपाही थे कारगिल में, वो या तो मुंह में चीनी डाल के या नमक डाल के या गीला आटा डाल के, क्योंकि भूखों मर रहे थे वो कारगिल हाइट्स पर, वो ऐसे करके मरे हैं। जो जब उनकी लाशें मिली हैं तो उसमें सिर्फ या तो चीनी फाँक रहे थे या ऐसा कुछ खा रहे थे। ऐसी परिस्थिति में उनके सिपाही मरे, और परवेज मुशर्रफ went to become the president of Pakistan and dictator of Pakistan, and he did not tell his own people that yes, so many Pakistani soldiers had died in Kargil, but that was just Kargil. There are other deaths Pakistan has hidden from its own people, और अपने अफसरों की बॉडी वो ले जाते हैं, जवानों की बॉडी वहीं छोड़ जाते हैं. That is what is the truth about Pakistan, verifiable truth. As far as this instance is concerned, according to our intelligence, there were 300 mobile phones that were active. According to the Foreign Secretary Shiv, a large number of terrorists, trainers, and according to sources, ISI officers were there who were killed here.
Absolutely. See, the Air Force has not given out any absolute numbers. To the best of my journalistic abilities, I can say that in a pre-facto situation when the planning was happening for this particular airstrike in Balakot, and remember there were other targets. There was Chakoti, there was Muzaffarabad. Bahawalpur was an outside chance of a target as well, even though it was very difficult. There must have been an intelligent estimate, Gaurav, of the number of people expected to be there during any certain time of strike, especially at night.
And especially at a time when Pakistan was shifting people from their terrorist training camps and shifting them to Balakot, thinking they'll be safe there.
That's right. And so these numbers might have been there in some kind of pre-strike assessment of number of people expected to be there. And given that the strikes were successful, the bombs penetrated and very likely caused a lot of human casualties inside, I am assuming that somewhere within the government, someone must have latched on to that old number and said, if the strikes were successful and this many terrorists were expected to be inside, then this must be the casualty count.
But अगर देखे भी, कितने बम वहाँ पर गिराए गए?
There were, I know for a fact that 80% hit. The total number is not being given out by the Air Force, and that's totally okay, because there is an issue of availability of weapons that could be revealed if those numbers are given out, and therefore the Air Force has requested us not to conjecture on the number of bombs actually.
मतलब 1000 किलो का एक बम, 900 से 1000 किलो का एक बम, मान लो 5 भी गिराए गए, 10 गिराए गए.
No, with a penetration warhead, if assuming 5 of them have penetrated 4 buildings, then it's highly unlikely that a lot of people actually survived if they were inside.
मतलब गायबाना नमाज़े जनाजा के लिए भी ना कुछ नहीं मिलेगा, सब जल भुन के राख हो गया होगा.
Another point I wanted to make is an important point is that the Pakistan state and government has in the past been able to hide the bodies and the deaths of army personnel, jawans. Yes. And these people are not government employees. They're not army personnel. They're terrorists and people who are being indoctrinated. So therefore, it's highly unlikely that that anybody will get to know anything anytime soon. I think, yeah.
There is also Shankar the compulsion of the Pakistan not to acknowledge not only the F-16 which has been shot down by India, but also the heavy damage is because the Pakistani army, the administration is under subservient to the Pakistani army.
Once again, the F-16 bogey is an expected one because the fact is there is no way in hell that Pakistan would have mounted an aggression, an aerial aggression against India with the F-16 not somewhere in the mix. Now, the Indian Air Force has nowhere said that only F-16s, tried to ingress into India. But it is a fact through electronic signatures, the deployment of AMRAAM missiles, which only the F-16 and the Pakistan inventory can fire. All of this and certain other call sign data, which is of a classified nature, which has been collected also, proves that an F-16 was used. In fact, we reported today on India Today that Wing Commander Abhinandan was the only fighter jet that launched a missile, and therefore the kill of that F-16 has been attributed directly to his aircraft. One more interesting thing that I want to bring to NewsMo's viewers is that there were ground radars and there were ground imaging facilities of the Indian Army that have captured the ejection from this particular F-16. They haven't captured the aircraft itself, but they've captured the ejection where they very clearly saw two parachutes coming down.
Which is very interesting. So these are two parachutes apart from the parachute of Wing Commander Abhinandan.
That's right. So I hear that the Army's footage did not capture Abhinandan's parachute, but it captured this particular aircraft where the parachutes were very close together, and that's not possible if they were two separate aircraft. They had to be the same aircraft because the ejections usually take place just seconds after each other, and that could only be in an F-16B or an F-16D. So either the American supplied F-16s or the ones that Pakistan got from the Jordanian Air Force.
So this is the fact that Pakistan once again is hiding from its own people, but it cannot for long. How do we explain this? देखिए, F-16 दो प्रकार के हैं जो पाकिस्तान एयरफोर्स के पास है. एक जो अमेरिका ने दिया था अपग्रेडेड ब्लॉक 50 और एक जो जॉर्डन से उन्होंने लिया था, और दोनों में दो पायलट्स को उड़ाने की क्षमता है. तस्वीरें हैं जो इस समय पब्लिक डोमेन में कुछ हैं लेकिन अनवेरिफाइड हैं. भारत सरकार की तरफ से भी सूत्र ये बता रहे हैं that these images may just come out in public domain. They will show two pilots ejecting. Now, who are these pilots? Are they alive? Are they not alive? Pakistan hid dead bodies in Kargil. Pakistan has hidden dead bodies subsequently. Is Pakistan hiding a lot more? Look, we'll be tracking that story very closely, but Pakistan cannot get away by lying about a missing F-16. You cannot lie about a missing F-16.
Major General Asif Ghafoor of the Inter-Services Public Relations, very famously in that first press conference or soundbite said, we've got taken one of them prisoner, he's our captive, and there are two other pilots in the area, which means they were still searching for them. And we don't know what has happened to those pilots. We wish them well. We hope they're okay because ultimately they are just pilots and warriors obeying orders of generals who never go to the front to fight. So at the end of the day, there is this huge global mystery over who these other two pilots really are. Where are they? Because in India, we admitted that the Indian Air Force admitted that Abhinandan was missing, and through international and diplomatic pressure, he was brought back within 48 hours. But where these other two pilots are, nobody knows. Are they F-16 pilots? Were they not F-16 pilots? Pakistan has not even commented on that. They've only focused on, we've not lost an F-16. In fact, it has sounded so defensive that the world is wondering, hey, wait a minute. Nobody initially said anything about F-16. Why are you jumping and saying F-16, F-16, F-16? So,
And as you pointed out, an AMRAAM cannot be fired off
any other aircraft.
Another question on the AMRAAM missile. As they said that the Indians have given evidence to the Americans as well. What action can America take if it is proved that these missiles were fired on a Pakistani platform?
Now, the rules under which the F-16s were sold to Pakistan, there's been a lot of doubt and misinformation and maybe people misunderstanding what the sale was about, saying that these aircraft can't be used against India. That's not technically correct. Basically, in the 80s, when these fighters were sold to Pakistan, they were sold to keep the war balance between India and Pakistan and so that Pakistan could defend itself in the event of an Indian aggression. What happened on the morning of the 27th was an aggression by Pakistan. These were fighters that came from Pakistan and tried to intrude in the Sundarbani Naushera sector of the line of control. And the Indian fighters that were there were actually pushing back that thing. So that's one of the reasons why analysts around the world are finding it very suspicious that Pakistan is hell-bent on trying to say that there was no F-16 involved. They're not saying anything else about their other aircraft, but they're saying F-16 nahi tha. They're hell-bent on trying to say that because it could prove to be a little troublesome for them with the Americans.
Also, so America has already in the past put several sanctions on F-16s. Pakistan had major trouble getting them upgraded. Pakistan could not get additional F-16s, and these F-16s were upgraded. In 2008 when Pakistan got more, it was to combat Taliban. It was to fight terrorists. And even then, India had raised the point that why would Pakistan need air-to-air missiles against Taliban? But since America needed Pakistan's help to combat the Taliban in Afghanistan, so they gave them air-to-air missiles, as Shiv rightly pointed out, to in a way ensure that there is parity between India and Pakistan. India has been opposing it constantly. India has been mounting a lot of pressure on the United States that this will be misused. This is proof of misuse of an American F-16 and misuse of an AMRAAM missile, and India has already taken this up with the United States of America. Consequences? Well, Pakistan will have to come clean, or Pakistan anyways in the international doghouse for being a global epicenter of terror and an international terror sponsor, so there will be consequences.
Question from Gajanan Bhatt. He's asking that a Pakistan army personnel and their media has been repeating that Indian jets were chased by Pakistani jets during the first the airstrike at Balakot, and they had to release their payload. Can you explain? Can a fighter jet release all the payload or these spice bombs at one place, or they can hit multiple targets?
Okay, so there are several things that are problematic about that assumption. First of all, it's tempting to think of the Balakot strike as the Mirage fighters directly over Balakot and just deploying the weapons in a vertical manner. That's not the case at all. The fighters were far away from Balakot, and it is the standoff quality of these weapons that allows these weapons to be deployed from tens of kilometers away. We understand it was more than 50 kilometers away from which these weapons were actually deployed. So no, it was not very close to Balakot. So there's no question of them being chased away from Balakot and deploying them very quickly. So that's one falsehood dismissed. Second falsehood is that all of these Mirages were not flying together. Again, it's very tempting, in this world of, Bollywood imagery, it's very tempting to think of like a dozen Mirages flying in formation, in a very sleek sweep formation, conducting this bombing and, flying away. Not at all. There were 3 different formations of Mirages which were flying. 2 of those formations were actually decoy or deception formations to try and lure the Pakistan Air Force, because they would obviously be scrambled because of ground radars, in another direction. And my information, Gaurav, is actually that there was one group of those Mirages which was flying in a radial towards Bahawalpur, yes, which is what energized and alerted F-16s or whatever those fighters were, which was scrambled because Bahawalpur was like a massive target, and therefore the airspace around Balakot or in that radial towards Balakot was almost entirely clear, and the Mirages had a clean shot at Balakot, and the nearest aircraft during and before the airstrike was 150 kilometers away, way further than any of their closest weapons.
Pakistan, not even in its wildest dreams, and this is something that Asif Ghafoor actually confessed, Pakistan, not even in its wildest dreams, thought that the Indian Air Force will launch an airstrike. Pakistan actually thought that it will be another surgical strike, ground troops will come. That is why they had deployed, waiting for surgical strike 2 from ground. And that is why many say, जहां पाकिस्तान की सोच खत्म हो जाती है, वहां से भारत की सोच शुरू होती है.
On that note, I just want a quick question that is coming in from Pakistani.
I'm surprised we haven't gotten more already.
Well, you are getting a lot of them. All of them are
Abusive.
The usual,
That's okay.
usual Pakistani intelligence coming into play. But Mudassir Ahmad is asking if it was a Pakistani aggression, then why did the Indian jet fell down in Pakistani territory?
Because I'll take that first and then you can answer, because the initiative was on the defenders because they went up against the F-16s. It was an interception team of about 8 aircraft from the Indian side, which is, if I'm not mistaken, 4 MiG-21s, 2 Mirages, and 2 Su-30s. There was a package of 24 Pakistani fighters that came in. So they weren't messing around. Okay, this was a real. This was serious. They really, they've said that they wanted to, just show that they could drop bombs in some place. I happen to have information, and we'll be putting out a detailed story on this, that they deployed an H4 precision guided munition that actually fell within a brigade headquarters. It didn't cause much damage, but within a brigade headquarters compound, not close to any built-up structures, thankfully. So this whole idea that they were not trying to bomb anything, only sending a message, is hogwash of the worst kind from Pakistan. I've seen those images of the remnants of that structure. Secondly, the Indian Air Force fighter fell inside the Pakistani side because Wing Commander Abhinandan had a lock with his MiG-21 Bison. It was a Wimple R-73 heat-seeking missile that had a lock. And when he was almost crossing the line of control, he took a decision as a fighter pilot. It's that killer instinct of a fighter pilot. Many of us can pretend to, sit in judgment about, why didn't he turn away? Wasn't it an irresponsible move? Ultimately, a fighter pilot needs to take a decision in less than a few seconds. Yeah. And his decision was, I've got a lock on what the Air Force says was an F-16, and I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to chase this guy in hot pursuit. I don't care if I'm crossing the line of control. I'll figure it out once I get this guy. And he got the guy.
भैया जो भारत की तरफ आंख उठेगी वो आंख निकाली जाएगी, इसमें तो दो राय नहीं है. अगर आप नियंत्रण रेखा का उल्लंघन करेंगे तो आपको कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस उसके सहने तो पड़ेंगे. आप ये सोचिए, पाकिस्तान, मतलब आप कितना फिजाया करते हैं, आप अपनी एयरफोर्स को कितना जबरदस्त मानते हैं, लेकिन ये सोचिए कि 1960 के दशक में बने मिग-21 ने, ऑफ कोर्स एन अपग्रेडेड मिग-21 बाइसन, फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम इन द हिस्ट्री ऑफ एविएशन इट हैज ब्रॉट डाउन एन F-16. मतलब अमेरिका सोच रहा होगा कि मेरी मत मारी गई थी कि मैंने पाकिस्तान को F-16 दिया, पाकिस्तान ने F-16 गिरवा दिया. मतलब कुछ तो इज्जत रखी होती विमान की, अगर पायलट की ना रखी होती. अब वो विमान की इज्जत नहीं रही, अब क्या करें, वो कहाँ बेचेंगे उस F-16 को ले जाके, कि वो तो 60 के दशक के मिग-21 ने गिरा दिया. खैर, बट दिस इज विंग कमांडर अभिनंदन. अभिनंदन को लाख अभिनंदन है. ना केवल एक F-16 गिराया, गिनेस बुक में अपना नाम दर्ज कराएंगे, तो दो राय नहीं है. अमेरिकन एविएटर्स आर टॉकिंग अबाउट हिम, और वो भी हम इंफॉर्मेशन पब्लिक डोमेन में डालेंगे. मतलब पाकिस्तान जितना झूठ बोले उसको मुंह छुपाने की जगह मिलने नहीं वाली है आने वाले कुछ समय में. आप न्यूज़मो देखते रहिएगा. न्यूज़मो पर वी विल पुट आउट एवरी फैक्ट. एंड आसिफ गफूर साहब के चेहरे से जो रंग उतरा था ना जब वो एयर स्ट्राइक हुई थी, अभी वो रंग और उतरेगा. Shiv and I will keep getting you the latest. Won't we, Shiv?
We will. I think this is only the first of many bits of information that we'll be putting out here on India Today and NewsMo. And like I said, yesterday the Pakistanis were spooked by an Indian submarine. They claimed it was an Indian submarine. It turned out to be possibly recycled footage. The Indian Air Force has shot down 2 drones in the last couple of days, last 1 week. Any of our viewers who might think that, is this going to be the end of it? Definitely not. I think what the Air Chief said about this being ongoing operations is very much going to be something that we see. Nobody wants war, but ultimately this is the military doing what it's asked to and doing it very well. And like Gaurav just said, going across not in just POK but into Pakistan and conducting strikes is something that I think most Indians, it hasn't sunk in for most Indians just yet. This was something that was historic. So keep watching. We'll keep getting you more. Thanks very much.
And just one last point before we let you go. Our friends from Pakistan who are joining us, दोस्त अपने देश में पूछो that does your country want to go to war for siding with jokers like Hafiz Mohammed Saeed and that Maulana of terror Masood Azhar? Is it worth it? Are these two jokers worth it? इस्लाम के नाम पर जो लड़ाई करवा रहे हैं, they are not following any Islam. Islam does not say that you kill 40 innocent people who are traveling in a CRPF bus. What they are doing, is this worth it? Because उनके चक्कर में बहुत से नुकसान होगा पाकिस्तान का. Unless Pakistan wants that, advisable for Pakistan to simply take action against these UN designated global terrorists and terrorist organizations and move forward towards a brighter future. Ankit, I believe there's one more question. Of course. And NewsMo, सबसे पहले सबसे सटीक खबर India Today par, NewsMo par. We will get that for you with news and analysis. Shiv will continue talking to his sources in the Indian Air Force and get you much more evidence of that Pakistani F-16 going down.